Everybody. So first of all, this session was titled Case Teaching, but as you've just heard from Xavier, I was asked to not talk about teaching via the case method, but instead to talk about teaching via other methods. And that's actually great for me right now because I've spent my entire career teaching classic case discussion style MBA classes. But over the last couple of years, two things happened. One is that Dartmouth, for the first time, introduced an undergraduate strategy class. We don't have business majors, but we now have a taste of Tuck being our business school. And I have the honor and the pleasure of teaching these undergraduates, which is really exciting. And at the same time, I was invited to participate as a fourth author on an existing textbook, but I'm the author that's in charge of actually taking this textbook kind of into the modern era and updating it. And so I have the opportunity to sort of test out my materials in the classroom. So this is all working together. And what I found is that for me, in this situation with my undergrads, using mixed methods with them works really well. So I'm just going to run through kind of quickly kind of what I do. So obviously there are many different ways to go about teaching. You can use a lecture method, you can do a pure case method, you can do a mix of these things, you can use a simulation or games, and you can also do project-based teaching where you bring executives in, you give students essentially a consulting project and you kind of guide them through this. I'm sure there are other methods as well. I've used all of these except for simulations. I've never done a simulation, but these are possible things to do. What I do is I use a mix of methods in the classroom and also within each session. So every session I try to mix it up, and then over the course of the semester I mix it up as well. And the reason I do this is because there's plenty of research out there on attention spans, and what they find is that for the average college student, attention span is 7 to 10 minutes. And human adults can go for 20 minutes max. I mean, we need a break, and even that 20 minutes max, that assumes that we're already taking kind of little mini breaks in the middle of this. So it's hard to sustain attention. And it's, of course, lots more fun. I mean, it's fun for me, it's more fun for them, it's engaging, and so that's why I do it. So over the course of the term, what do I do? Combinations of things. I do lecture, I do a lot of lecturing actually. I do use cases. I use both mini cases and full-length cases. I do a little bit of what Howard does in that I also face this problem of having to deal with doing a case when nobody's read it, so you'll learn more about that. I use a lot of videos, and I do some exercises, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the end of this giving you a sort of flavor of how I use exercises in the classroom. I do games as well, and then on an occasional basis I have a guest speaker, although I try to make sure that I really know what they're going to say and how they're going to come off in the classroom, because guest speakers can be iffy, so you have to sort of watch that. Okay, so within each session, what do? Well, I make a point to keep things moving, and varying methods helps with that. But essentially, in terms of my format, most of my sessions are either essentially a case day or essentially a lecture day. What I do is I introduce materials with lecture day, and then I sort of drill it, bring it home with the case, showing them how this all works in operation. So for each of these basic formats, then how do I mix things up? So in case discussion days, one thing I do a whole lot is I really use videos. And in particular, I do a lot of classic cases. Although my textbook has new, fresh, every year updated cases, I don't use them. I like to use old classics. And I do this because, cases are teaching vehicles, and the old classics, the really good ones, are really good teaching vehicles, and you can't beat them. So some of the cases I use are Southwest Airlines, Walmart, Disney, De Beers, and for these cases there are really great videos. I don't use long videos, I use video clips. For some of them, like with Southwest Airlines, that's a day that I'm teaching culture and leadership, and I insert 4 different little video clips throughout the kind of interactive lecture discussion, case discussion that we're doing that day, and it works well. I use some demonstrations. So for example, I do the Cola Wars case, I use a taste test, and I use that because we're really, the topic is, of course, differentiation, you know, to do that, I show them it's possible to differentiate even when the product is essentially exactly the same. There are perceptions that differ, you know, that this can matter. So that's fun. I do the Newell Rubbermaid case, and sometimes I do that with a little shopping trip. You know, I kind of pretend we're going into one of the big discount players and we're shopping for paintbrushes or whatever, and again, it kind of brings home some of the lessons of the case. I do a lot of breakout groups, so I will divide them up into tiny groups, and then sometimes I will call on one group or two groups to come up at the end and give us their you know, a summary of their presentations. So that's another thing to do. And sometimes I use debates. I'll just divide the room up into two sides, and I will force them not to have their own opinion, but to argue a particular side of the debate, and that also helps them to sort of think through things differently and sort of anticipate what arguments might be on the other side. And then sometimes I also do some numbers analysis, that there are concepts that I can bring home more effectively when I translate them into, you know, what does this mean in a numbers basis? Because as I tell them, you know, companies use numbers analysis quite a lot too, and increasingly so. On a lecture day, what do? Well, they're always interactive lectures, so I don't talk at them like I'm talking at you right now. You know, I ask them questions. I make sure that they have read the material. They know they have to come prepared. I do some cold calling, but I also allow them to participate by choice quite a lot. So they're always interactive, even when it's a lecture day. This is more engaging, but also it makes them be prepared. It also it helps me to figure out when they have you know, good understanding of the concepts. In addition, I use exercises in small discussion groups quite a lot, and I'll give you some samples of that. And I sometimes use games to illustrate concepts as well. The other thing that I do is I use a lot of stories. Stories really bring concepts to life, and it makes it real for the students, and they really engage with the stories. And sometimes I ask them for stories, and that works well too. Actually, let me give you a sort of quick example of that. One of the things that I do with my students on the first day is I ask them to fill out little information sheets, you know, and I say, you know, tell me something about yourself, and do you have any experience in business? And then I look through those, and sometimes from that I get great examples. So, you know, one of the little stories that came about was, you know, a student who, when she was young, you know, she started a business. She was in 4th grade, and this business was little origami turtles, and she was making them for herself, and she found that her friends were fascinated by these turtles, and so she started selling them for 15 cents a piece. And then she thought about, you know, well, you know, how is Barbie so successful? You know, how did Mattel make so much money from Barbie? Oh, it's not the dolls, it's the accessories. So she started making turtle accessories, you know, houses and trucks and cars and things for turtles. And she had such demand for this that she needed to hire some people. So this was a 4th grade class, but she went to a different 4th grade and a 5th grade class, and she hired people to manufacture these turtles. And the whole thing fell apart when her workers realized that she was paying them 25 cents a week, and she was making $5 a piece on a turtle house and 15 cents a piece for each of the turtles she sold, and she was selling thousands of them. So, you know, so what I teach with that is, you know, this is a section where I'm teaching them about ecosystems and the need for cooperation and the need for sort of win-win, and, you know, it's not just all about, you know, profit maximization, and stories like this help to bring it to light, and plus it features a student and they love the attention, and so that's an example. Okay, so some quick examples of some in-class exercises. I love doing exercises, and I think the students really engage with this as well. So I was asked by our organizers here to be sure that I talk about something that has to do with ethics. So here's my little ethics example. One of the things that I do early in the course when we're still kind of setting things up is I do have a chapter in the book that's specifically on ethics, and I give them sections of that to read. And one of the things that comes up is the issue of competitive intelligence. So obviously this refers to activities designed to gather information about your competitors that can help you to make strategic decisions and compete more effectively. But in this particular arena, the ethical limits are very, very unclear. And so what I do here is I give them this exercise. I hand them out a sheet that has maybe sort of 12 sort of little situations, and I ask them to work in small groups. So this is groups of 2 or 3, turn around, talk to your neighbors. And I ask them to go through each of these things and to talk about what they would do, their opinions. Is this ethical or is this not ethical or somewhere in between? So an example of this is, do you feel that it's ethical to go to your competitor's property site and look through their trash for information? Does it make a difference if the trash is not on their site but it's on the street? Is this an ethical situation? So they go through each of these things, they talk about it themselves, we come together and we talk about this as a group, but also I'm able to give them specific information about court cases, when in fact it's been legally found to be a violation of ethics, and we talk about gray areas. What do you do when it's not black and white, when it's not legal, or it's not clearly illegal, but is it right? What's the sort of moral situation here too? So I end with this by handing out an example of a company code of conduct. And so the one that I choose in particular this is United Technologies. It's one on the website. I just download it and I print copies of them for the students to look at. And they look at this code of conduct, and then I have them think about the extent to which this can help. Because in these situations in particular where there are gray areas, there are legal implications for companies, there can be real cost to this, but if you're a company with a particular set of values, you might want to be really making sure that your employees get those values and that they live those values, that they practice them in their daily situations. So having a code of conduct can really help give employees strong guidance when it comes to making these difficult choices in the gray area. So that's kind of where we end up. So that's one quick example. I'll give you one more, and this is a numbers example. So one of the things that I like to teach is about the price cost value model, and I don't want to talk about that now, but those of you who might use it, Tammy Matson's drawn a lot of attention to this. There was a sort of 2003 SMJ article of theirs that talks a little bit about that. I have an article also 2003 with Jay Barney in Managerial Decision Economics where we talk about that. And any of the work that you see, most of the work that you see on business models talks about how a business model could be broken up into the customer value proposition, which is basically customers' perceived value of a product minus the price. It's kind of the value delivered to the customer. And then there's the profit formula, which is price minus cost. This is on a per unit basis. But anyway, these concepts are tough. These are among the hardest things that I teach my students. But a way to make it, I try to make it real with examples, but I also give them some numbers to play with it. So specifically, in my textbook, one of the little illustration capsules, which is like a 2-paragraph thing, has a really interesting case. It's about the Aravind Eye Clinic in India, where they do sort of wonderful sort of social stuff for the community, but this is essentially an example of a focused, low-cost strategy. And there's enough numbers in the example that you can actually figure out what is we can calculate on a per unit basis the customer value proposition, we can calculate the profit formula, we can calculate the total economic value created, and that they can see that this is sort of doing well by doing good. So it's a lovely example, and and it makes it real for the students to be able to sit there and figure out, again, in small groups with an exercise, how to calculate this. They help each other along because for some of them it's easy, for some of them it's hard, and that's what we do. That's it, folks. Just last thing is sort of where can you find some of these exercises if you like to use them? Lots of places. I like to use news articles because, again, for students it makes it real. So I've found some great news articles of a little 5 forces exercise that they can use, blogs, magazines, etc. These mini cases, illustration capsules, any textbook will have this sort of thing. And it's nice to use a selection of them and to sort of find examples that resonate with you. Textbook give you, again, any textbook will have, for users of the book, you can access prepared slides, prepared lecture slides. In these sets of prepared lecture slides, sometimes like 30 slides long, you might go through them and you'll find that for the illustration capsule, for example, they will give you a set of 3 questions, a quick exercise that you can use. Exercises at the end of textbook chapters. Ideas from your colleagues. Share ideas with one another. This is where I get some of my best ideas for great exercises. Teaching sessions at conferences. There's now a first teaching session here at the Academy, and there'll be more such. And then again, shared ideas from online sources. I don't know if BPS is still collecting these things online. They were not long ago, and I hope that they still are, because this is another potentially valuable source. That's it. Thank you.
Hey, so good morning. So I'm going to take you through an exercise of a situation where increasingly is more and more common. You hand out a case and ask your participant to read the case the night before, and they came back, and 5 minutes down into the classroom, you know exactly they have never read the case, and you have 90 minutes to go. What do you do with them? Is a common problem facing executive MBA as well as executive education. You can't even grade them. They grade you as a professor because they give you evaluation and you get evaluated as a result. So this is a common problem that I face day to day, and I'll try to demonstrate one technique that you can overcome this challenge sometimes. I'll give you the background about the case that we're going to embark upon. This is really a session where we talk about how emerging market firms move up the value chain, but the learning actually applicable to all the multinational in the West as well. So the case setting is really about this company, the 5th largest laptop manufacturer in the world, how they try to innovate better in their product category. So we'll begin the discussion about what is the existing product development process looks like inside a company, and then we'll talk about how can this company innovate better. So I typically, if I sense that nobody's read my case yet, then we'll start begins of playing them a commercial, a TV commercial of this company so that they get a feel of what kind of company we're talking about. So I'm going to show you a very quick commercial of this company, and I want you to have a sense and try to understand and try to perceive what kind of company we're talking about. They emphasize a lot about quality and innovation, or they're kind of just like another dumb Chinese company out there, okay? So when you view this company commercial, try to collect and have a sense of what kind of culture we're talking about here. So the company has been around for about 15, 20 years, not an old company like IBM, and it begins with a humble beginning in Taiwan. Now they look like that. They begin as a contract manufacturer, making motherboard for Dell and HP, no low tech and stuff like that. And within the time span of 20 years, this is where they are. So anyone, just tell me a little bit, after you view the commercial, what kind of company we're talking about? What's your impression? In terms of the corporate culture, perhaps. General description. Yeah, At least they aspire to be innovative. Now, whether they're Apple or not, we don't know. But at least they aspire to become one of those. Anyone else?
I find it very slow, more sleepy design.
Okay. So the commercial is bad taste. Sleepy. Yeah, could be. Maybe too slow moving. Anyone else? Right. They try to differentiate in an overcrowded space. I mean, everyone knows what a computer is, and they try to at least a little bit more innovative and try to differentiate themselves a little. So let's dive inside the company, and we try to see what kind of life is like if you were the product manager within a SUSE-TAC. So this is a generic process of how they develop product. Upstream, they begins with concept design or scoping. They need idea. So that's stage one. And then they move to product planning. They need to start to build a business case. Before the company invests, they need to know whether there's a product market out there. So that's the time when product manager begins to develop a business case, market sizing, value proposition, whatnot. And then if things goes well, of course, then you pass through a review gate. Senior management begins to say, okay, we'll give you this amount of money, product manager, let's try it out and develop a prototype. I want to see what kind of product you actually talked about and go interview with some end consumer and get more taste and get more data. And then they move to pilot production. Again, another gate review that senior management team need to collectively approve this project. And then finally get launched, mass production, ongoing support, et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty generic for most of the company, not just IT, but even chemical company, automobile, whatnot. So let's think about the first stage. When you were still at the product concept phase, as a middle manager, product manager, where do you get this market input? If you were to innovate for the next generation of laptop, where are the market input, or who are you going to talk with to get this new product concept out there? Anyone? So you are the product manager inside a company. You need to come up with the next laptop. Where do you get input from?
By watching the commercial, I had the impression that the input was, how can I make a MacBook or something that looks like a MacBook and has all the features of a MacBook.
All right.
Explain how all the features of the MacBook are commercial.
Okay.
Lower cost.
Okay.
So I mean, the work has been done before them to a certain extent.
Yep. So you look at competitors' offering. Yep. In this case, you mentioned Apple. Yep. So you look at competitors' offering out there. Okay. You look at Apple in this case. Fair enough. Anyone else? This is clearly not a typical executive education session. The literature tells us, yes. Okay. Consumers. Okay. So you hear from consumer. Tell me a little bit about where do you collect consumer insights? So consumer don't knock on the door of the product manager at a SUSE-TAC. Where did this guy get consumer insight? Through what channel?
Web communities?
Web communities. So a lot of people do blogging. So all right. So that's one channel. Web. Okay. Where else? Where else would this new product manager get insight from? Salesman. Okay, the sales force. I'm going to push the envelope a little bit. Where would the salespeople get consumer insight from? Distributors. Are these distributors, such as Best Buy or Amazon, when they give feedback to the salespeople at a SUSE-TAC, will they give them future trend or existing past information? What kind of data we are talking about here? Historical trend, probably. Yeah, absolutely. Historical trend. All right. What other information there are? Yes.
What about the
Mm-hmm.
So this is not really historical, it's all about what's been sold, right? What has been sold, you can say,
Okay.
the past several years or so, but it's like what I'm looking for when I'm buying, when I'm buying a laptop.
Okay.
I don't know if that information is going back to the manufacturer.
Okay. So there could be, if ASUS actually send manager from the office to go to Best Buy and follow customers.
So if the marketing department of ASUS is doing focus groups or service, they can actually get this information firsthand.
Okay, so that could be focus group. Yeah, absolutely. Any input? Yeah.
Customer complaints on existing products.
Okay, customer complain on existing products, sure thing. What about suppliers? Component suppliers, are they important? Who would be the major supplier in this space, giving them input? Processors, Intel, Microsoft, big input, because they really dictate the technological trajectory of what your next laptop can improve. And maybe Samsung on LCD panel and things like that. All right, so let's assume this guy, after gathering all this information, he developed a product concept document. He tried to already start to articulate what kind of value proposition of the next laptop for the consumer. Then he really needs to start building up a business case in order to get funding. So usually at this point, they will start to build what people call a dummy, a physical dummy. So not exactly a very elaborate prototype, but at least you need to show people how, at a high level, how the product would look like. There would be some technical drawing, for sure, to define how this component will be getting put together. And of course, you need to specify what kind of functional specification. There is a functional specification document need to be put together. These are quite engineering-focused documents. So tell me, who are the other actors inside ASUS will get involved at this stage, beyond just the product manager? Who are the actors may get involved at this stage? Engineers. So yeah, at ASUS there are plenty of different engineers, including mechanical engineers who are responsible for industrial design. There are electronic engineers and industrial designer. So 3 types of people already coming in. Who else would get involved, you think? The sales department, what kind of input they would give? So the sales department would come in and wait in to see, is your design going to have a prospect or not? So they may give some additional input to modify. Who else? Who else would give input at this stage? Sorry. Finance. Yes, the CFO, of course, the finance guy. What would be on top of their mind? Once the finance guy come in, what is the big question they're going to ask? Margins, cost and margin. I want certain ROI for this project. If you don't meet certain rota, forget about it. Okay, suppose all of these guys are happy about it and they pass through the first review gate, then they're really getting into the development and, more important, testing phase. Who's involved now? Who are the new actors involving here now?
Whoever's managing your supplier network?
Yep, so the logistic people coming in. So you cannot just ask for certain component. The logistics guy will make sure Intel and Microsoft or Samsung would actually have the concrete supply. And so they're gonna wait in and see whether your product can actually be fulfilled. Who else would coming in?
Quality assurance.
Oh God, the QA people would come in, of course. They want to make sure our brand is, the product is gonna communicate the right image of our brand, right? Who else would come in? Yeah, of course. The legal department, because there is always the term and condition and the warranty and things like that. Who else would get involved? Production, yes. The manufacturing guy begins to need to schedule because they need to plan ahead how the mass production system gonna work. And if you require too much customization for this particular laptop, the factory guy is not going to be very happy. Who else? Marketing. What would they do? Analyze, validate the segment for sure. Market communication. Yeah, lots of people coming in. Oh, by the way, I haven't asked yet. So when QA people coming in, legal people coming in, even marketing people coming in order to win their support, how do they make sure the judgment that they are making is right? So let's say the marketing people coming in and look at preparing a brief. How do they come up with the brief that is right for this product? Do they follow policy, existing policy perhaps? Or the manufacturing person, when they see this new laptop, what is in the mind of the factory manager when he think about, should I support this product or not? What is in their head in terms of calculation? When the factory guy, production capacities? Yep. Yep. And the existing procedures, perhaps, existing policy. QA is big thing, existing policies. So all of these guys are bounded by the existing operating procedures for sure. So SOP loom large. Now, finally, they're getting launched and ongoing support, customer service, et cetera, et cetera. So looking back, what is the life like for this product manager? This is the product manager, and this is how the product getting developed. How would he feel by the time things getting out from the funnel? Tell us a little bit. You said exhausting.
Well, he said it's really a lot of constituents in the process. Has to review gates, set account management, resolve the players. There's probably been a lot of compromises in the process.
At the same time, it feels logical though, isn't it? It's kind of logical way. So what is this process good at? What is this process bad at? Is it a good process, bad process? All companies use this process because it's rational. What is bad at? Yeah.
Well, for David, it seems like it's great at improving slightly upon your existing product. Say, customers say, well, we don't like this button, we don't like that it's slow. Okay, great, I'll put it with the processor and move forward. So it's very good at incremental innovation.
It's great on incremental.
I mean, it doesn't seem from the arrows, but I don't want to be picky, but you wouldn't have feedback cycles in this. So if one stage, at a later stage you have problems, it doesn't seem that you can review it and fix it. So
Oh yeah, they have lots of arrow going back actually. I forgot to put that because if anyone are not happy, you need to go back to square one. If the QA person is not happy,
I mean, in any
damn.
project you will have situations where something doesn't fit the plan and you have to adapt to some in one way or the other.
Sure thing.
So it doesn't seem to
If any constituency not happy, the whole thing derail, go back to square one.
Well, I think it's frustratingly slow.
Frustratingly slow. Are there things that this company would not be able to do at all? Not just slow, but they were simply incapable of.
Appeal to new customer bases. I mean, every step of the way is like current customers that are being talked to. So I mean, it goes along with the incremental, but it's not just like disruptive innovation, but a new customer base.
Right, because every input here, we look at historical trend. Salesforce looks at existing most powerful distributors. Yeah, they're probably getting information here and there, but once you start to filter, the attention span get very limited. Saw some hand. Anyone got other comment as well?
Yeah, it seems to be a very internalized process.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have some type of additional activity in which you are monitoring what exactly is going on outside.
Yeah.
Because it is too slow, so you don't know when you come out with the product. In the middle of the processing, of the whole process, someone is doing something similar or better than before yours.
Yeah.
So you have to
Yeah. It's almost like the political process in the US. Like, if someone come up with a new bill to solve the whole healthcare issue, then once the bill gets sent through the entire different parts of the country, someone from Texas may like, I love your bill, but if you just can remove this single clause, I'll put my backing behind it. The bill swim to Massachusetts, and the other guy is like, if you can put additional stuff on here, then I can give you support. Otherwise, it's pretty tough for me. And by the time things get done, the original vision probably get changed quite a bit. And essentially what happened at ASUS is the top management continue to sit on the end of this funnel, looking at what came out. They thought, geez, this is just a commodity. There's no creativity. They shout further and louder towards the front, demanding this manager to be even more creative, taking more classes from different business schools. But then once he put those ideas into motion, what gets dripped off from the funnel looks exactly the same as last time. So I'm going to pause here. So now what we can do as an instructor, then you can open up the discussion about how the company can embark on radical innovation. So in this particular example, what I do is there is a case B. So I give them a break, because since they won't read anything until they're here in the classroom, so I have prepared case B, which is basically a 5 pages long case. It's at the time around 2007 when iPad is not even launched by Apple yet. ASUS was the first company that pioneered the netbook category. You might remember there is this little laptop at the time, around 2007 to 2009, and it was such a bestseller that it allows ASUS for the first time to distribute their product in the United States, the last stronghold of HP and Dell. So it is quite a radical innovation in the sense that they try to target a new customer segment. They're targeting using netbook to target people who use not to use computer, like homemakers who stay at home, or teenagers or young kids or elderlies. So it's a new market segment that they try to go after. Clay Christensen would call it a disruptive innovation because it really allows them to continue to improve in a different trajectory. But this setup simply doesn't work. So in case B, it talks a lot about different managerial intervention, top-down. There are critical intervention that has to happen for this particular environment to get this kind of innovation done inside a big company. So we give them basically 10 minutes to read through the case, and I ask them to note down what are the critical intervention that has to happen in the case of ASUS. So when they come back, we have a case debrief, and more importantly, then we shift the discussion to, we saw the CEO have done a lot. Are their intervention or these action can be delegated to middle manager? Because the last thing you want is to tell the participant, every time you do something radical, the top management team need to be involved. That's not a good theory. So what we try to build in the classroom is to identify what kind of actions that top management team can actually delegate to middle managers so that they can continue to embark on different types of disruptive innovation as an ongoing process. So that's essentially the design of the session. Or you can take it to a different direction. You can talk about open innovation in contrast with this setup. You can do a Lego case, a very mini Lego case, looking at how Lego innovate their product using end users' input and setting up a platform to collect advanced user input to embark on open innovation, which looks very different from this process. So there are multiple ways of taking the discussion further. To summarize, basically, whenever I confront with a problem that participants don't read the case, the one resources that I can rely on is their industry experience. So here, in the classroom setting, participants usually get very engaged and voice out what their frustration is, and somebody inevitably would be like, oh my God, that looks exactly like my company. So here you are. So thank you.
I hope you're all starting to feel like, holy crap, what did I get myself into, right? There's obviously a lot to this job. And by the way, if nobody's told you, the job that you're trying to get, you're going to be a teacher. You're not being trained to be a teacher. And I'm sure people have told you this already, right? You're going to have to teach. Obviously, that's what a professor does. Trust me, it has not sunk in yet. The magnitude of the task that's in your future and how orthogonal what you're doing now is to what you'll be asked to do. I mean, Howard did an excellent job up there, right? Margie's clearly gained so much experience and has so much to put into her classroom work. It takes a long time, right? This is something that you're embarking on that you will arrive at the job unprepared for. So before I start talking today, so take just a minute. First of all, take a deep breath in. We're almost there. Write down the question that you have at the top of your mind about teaching. Think about what's your big question about teaching and just jot it down. Really, I don't see any of you with a pen. I want you to actually write this down. Okay, so some of you did, so we'll come back to those in a minute. So what do I want to talk about? I want to start by giving you the standard advice, right? I think this is probably what they had in mind that I would speak to you about when they asked me to come here. So what is the standard advice about teaching? You've heard these things before, probably. Stack your teaching in one semester, right? Preserve your space for research. Secure one prep, right? So you only have to prepare one class. Hopefully that will last you for a few years so you can get your research off the ground, right? Now, both of these first two things typically can't be contractually put in your offer, so don't ask a school to do that. They won't. But you can get a feel when you go and visit schools. Is that what teaching typically looks like at the school, or is it not, right? So you'll get a pretty good idea. Both of those things are hugely important, right? Because you do ultimately need to be productive in your research. It's very hard to be productive in your research when you're also preparing for class and dealing with student emails and grading assignments and everything else that goes along with that. Don't reinvent the wheel. Margie had great examples of material that's out there for you to use. There's so much available. Okay, don't go ahead and think about, well, what should a strategy class be about, right? That's done for you, and it's been done really well, and it's been vetted, and the materials are great. Use that resource. I told you yesterday when I got to Emory, my first job, and joined the strategy department, I really had never been in a strategy classroom. So when they said to me, okay, you have 3 sections of undergraduate strategy to teach, you can really go ahead, you design the class however you want to. I thought, what? So I called up Jeff Furman and said, what am I supposed to teach in an undergraduate strategy class? And he sent me his materials. And I called a bunch of people, and honestly, they were all very, very similar in terms of, we have industry analysis and then competitive positioning and then capabilities and resources and then some fun topic thrown in at the end, right? That's what a strategy class, okay, great. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I used the cases that people knew worked. People use the same cases for a reason. The old ones are great. They have great teaching notes that have been vetted and contributed to. They have videos. The material's there. Don't reinvent the wheel. Margie also said, use your colleagues as a resource. I mean, they're there to help you. They've been through it. They know what the students are like. They know where the glitches are. They know what the problems are. Use them as a resource. If you can, go and sit in the semester before you're going to teach and observe the person who's been there before teaching the class, right? There's no better way to prepare, especially a case, than to watch somebody else teach it and figure out, what do the students have trouble with? How does the teacher respond? What can I do to make it go more smoothly? If you teach more than 30 students, and again, this varies by institution, ask for a TA, right? The more you can delegate all the process that goes along with teaching, the better. Especially if you get an experienced TA your first time around, they'll know more than you will about how to prepare for that class and all the process. So the bottom line of the standard advice, I think, is minimize your time dedicated to teaching, subject to some minimum teaching performance constraint that differs by university, and get your research done, right? This is the standard advice. So what else am I going to talk about? Well, I have some less conventional ideas. So as academics, and I have to admit I'm completely guilty of this, when we approach a course, we think about, what do I want to teach the students? What do I want them to learn? I want them to learn industry analysis. I want them to learn competitive positioning. I want them to learn capabilities. These are the theories, okay? Now let me figure out how I'm going to teach that to the student. And I want to suggest that's not necessarily the best way to think about a course. Instead, I think we should think about a course as a student's experience, right? What experience do we want to give the students in that class? We want to engage them above just telling them this content. We want to get them to really think about the concepts that we're trying to convey. We want them to be emotionally involved in the course to the extent that it's actually meaningful to them, right? I've actually been a teacher in everything I've done throughout my life. So when I was young, I swam a lot, partly because my mother dropped me off at the pool at 8 in the morning and picked me up at 5 at night, so what else was I going to do? But I got to be a swimmer, and then I was a swim instructor. Right? I used to be an aerobics instructor, which, if you want to know the best way to prepare for teaching MBAs, put on a leotard, get a mic, and shout at people while you're exercising. This is my best preparation for being a teacher. So I liked aerobics, I became an aerobics instructor. Everything I've done in my life, I've become a teacher. And why? It's that engagement with the students, right? It's that back and forth with the students. You need them to be engaged because that's your opportunity to inspire them, to change their mind about something. Changing someone's mind, changing the way they think about something is a lot different than providing them content. And I think we need to strive for both. So how do we do this? Margie did a great job of talking about all the different ways that we can do this in class. In-class activities and simulations. If there's a simulation that fits your topic, use it. To me, this is the most powerful thing. I start my class, and I'll talk a little bit about my most recent class I've been teaching. I start my class with an off-the-shelf simulation developed by MIT. They have great simulations. Go to their website and find them. But this is fish banks, which is a very old simulation. I'm teaching a class on environmental strategy, so this one is about fishermen. Each team is kind of a fishing firm, and they destroy the ocean. It has a predictable outcome. They all walk in the door knowing what's going to happen, but yet they destroy the ocean, right? And that is such a core concept in my class. I come back to it so many times throughout the class, and I say, remember, you all destroyed the ocean, and they know that, right? So getting them really involved in that way is a great thing that simulations can do. Debates, I use debates like Margie was saying, but instead of, so I do sometimes divide them in class and say, you're this side, you're that side. You can also have them prepare in advance. So 2 different student teams, not the entire class, but different student teams prepare different sides of the argument. For example, the Keystone Pipeline is a really topical area of debate in my subject area right now. So debate both sides of this, right? You take one side, you take the other. And the students have to do their homework. Right? What kind of arguments would you develop to support that position that I've assigned to you? How do you use data to make arguments, right? What do you anticipate is going to be the argument of the other side, and how are you going to counter that? So that can be a really powerful way to get students involved in the content, right? Get them engaged and making an argument about it. Similarly, I use student experts. So I'm going to teach a case that requires an understanding of the carbon market. Most people don't know how the carbon market works, what's the status of the carbon market, why do we have it, what does it mean? So I'll assign certain students to be experts the day before who are going to tell us about what is a carbon market, what are the rules, what's going on right now. And then they take the ownership and the responsibility for providing that content. And I don't have to lecture, right? So, and then all students have that content that we then can use to apply to the case. And finally, making learning visible, which is actually what you were just saying about the MBA students, right? You have to show them that they didn't know something before, they go through the class, and now they know something, right? A great way to do this is having a vote. Okay, so it can be really anything. How many people think that Clearwater Seafood is doing the right thing by getting the Sustainability Council stamp on their seafood products, right? Everybody thinks this is great at the beginning, and then you go through the case and you talk about the competitive dynamics of the market, and you show that no, that's leveling the playing field. That's destroying their differentiation advantage. They don't want to do that at all, right? Voila, the learning is visible, right? I taught you something today. I got you engaged, and there's a reason to be in my class. Okay, so the truly radical, and building on this sort of less conventional ideas about how to think about teaching, is I would push you, especially you who are at the beginning of your teaching career, because you don't have this kind of path dependence of the way you've been designing your class all this time. Think about your courses differently. Think about this experience that you want to give the student. How will the class challenge what the students are thinking? What's your big picture you want to convey to those students? What do you want them to walk away with? So think about our core strategy course. What do we want them to walk away with? If we go in there and talk industry structure, competitive positioning, capabilities and resources, I don't know, what's the big picture? Right? When we think about it as academics, we think, well, how do we explain variation in firm performance in the same industry? Boring. That's not the way students think about it, right? How can I create a strategy to make my company more profitable? How can I figure out which company in this industry I should invest in, right? Make it about a question they care about. Make it something from their perspective and have that big picture, and then go back and connect your content to that big picture question throughout the semester, right? Think about what you want them to walk away with. So if you reformat your class around those things and then build in all these activities and all these debates and all these student projects around that. Adjuncts and professors of practice. So what do we know about adjuncts and teaching? They're good. They're good. Darn good, right? So we as research faculty, I have to admit, usually kind of look down our nose. Well, it must be very content light. Well, they have lots of speakers who come and talk and CEOs and stuff, and the students love that. They engage differently with students. They're less in some way because of this. They get good teaching ratings because, the students like them. They're doing something right? We can learn from that. Talk to those adjuncts. Talk to those professors of practice. How do they think about their course? They think about the student experience. They think about how to engage with the students, right? So I think there's a lot to be learned from them if we can stop looking down our nose at them and really figure out what they're doing right that we can do in our classes. So I have this idea for what I call the two-layered course, or a two-layered way to think about your course. This will not be transparent to the students, right? They wouldn't see your class as two-layered, but the way for you to think about it, one layer is how to engage the students. Incorporate those practices of those professors of practice, those adjuncts. Get the students engaged, right? This is where the big picture question, what's the big puzzle? Getting the students to question their assumptions about the way the world works. The best comment I've ever had on a student evaluation came last year, where one of the students wrote, she made me think about everything differently. Yes, right? You had an impact on that student. You made them think about things differently. And bring your passion to class, right? You have to bring yourself to class. The students need to connect with you as a person. Yes, teaching is performance art, and you're going to have a persona, but it needs to be a genuine persona. First of all, you won't be able to maintain it for the entire semester if it's not, I promise you. But you have to be able to connect with them on a personal level, and that's really important for getting that two-way engagement. So that's kind of one layer, thinking about the experience you want to deliver. And the other layer is that content, the way we usually think about a class. What do I want them to learn? And you have to put the two together. Okay, so this is where I think it can be extremely powerful for research faculty to cooperate with those adjuncts, because we bring the heavy-hitting content, right? We bring, how does this fit into the research? What do I really want to push that has theoretical underpinnings? And they bring the experience. So I think if we can put them together, it's the best of both worlds. So let me give you a quick example from my class. So in some ways, there's a little bit of a special case. I've been teaching a class on strategies for environmental sustainability. It's an elective. The people who sign up for it are there by choice, which is a pleasure. And it's a topic that sometimes it's close to their heart. Now, I should say I get plenty of students in my class that are working in insurance, and they've heard about this sustainability thing, and they think it's good, that they better figure out what the heck it is, or they're taking it just out of interest. But in general, they have some passion for making the world a better place. And so we start out, with this puzzle about how can firms be both profitable and good for the environment, right? Because after all, I say it's not an environmental studies class, right? It's a business class. We're in the business school, so we're going to talk about the business case. And by the way, if you're going to be working at all in the business world, you have to be able to make the business case to get the environmental impact, right? So there's a reason to care about this, regardless of how passionate you are. And so we talk about big questions like, what responsibility does a firm have for the environment? Is it the same for all firms? Is it the same for all countries? Is it the same for all cases? What are the dimensions of that? We have debates on things like whether we should be doing fracking, right? What's good about it? What's bad about it? How does it impact the environment? How does it impact all the different stakeholders, the energy companies, the people who have to live next to the fracking facility, all these things. McDonald's and their environmental practices, which are surprisingly good, actually. Cape Wind, which is the controversial wind farm off of Massachusetts, is obviously very close to our heart up there. And all these have no clear answer, right? There's arguments to be made on both sides. There's very complicated and complex business issues on both sides. And so to really use those as examples of why we need to dig down beyond sort of the gut reaction and get into the business case for those. As I said, I use simulation students, experts. As Margie said, very selected visitors. Visitors can go either way, right? You need a visitor who you know what they're going to say, first of all. It's going to resonate with what you're trying to say in the class, second of all. And third of all, they're not going to be boring, right? Some people who are great in a one-on-one meeting are not great in front of the classroom. And so that's really very important. And then in terms of the content, this is an area where we're taking sustainability and issues that people really care about, but I want to connect it back to an overarching theory. Now, I'm somebody who comes from sort of the economics discipline, and so I connect it back to externalities and market failure and regulation and incentives and information asymmetry. And I sort of have this grand framework that I keep returning to throughout class and connect up these varied issues, right? So how does community building in less developed countries relate to McDonald's using cage-free eggs, and how are they kind of the same when we apply them all back to this big framework, and to keep connecting that back to something underlying and theoretical and rigorous. Okay, so to go back to our conventional thinking, I just described something that sounds pretty involved, right? You must be thinking, isn't my primary goal to minimize my teaching so I can free up my time for research, right? That's what I've always been told. Like I started, with the conventional wisdom here. I say, yes, your primary goal is to minimize your effort spent on teaching and how much teaching takes away from your research, but I think that's completely consistent with what I've described here. Being better in the classroom can minimize the effort that you spend on teaching, I promise. This two-layered approach, especially if you're starting from just designing your class, it doesn't take any more time. It's really just an additional way to think about providing the students with an experience that's consistent with you conveying this information. In fact, I think you'll spend a lot less effort trying to get your students on board, trying to get them to read your cases to begin with, if they're engaged, if they're part of the process. If you have all these varying activities, that's fun, like you were saying. Students are on board then. That makes your life easier. And I promise you, that frees up your life for your research so that you can focus on that and be productive in that. think that that's all I wanted to say. Yes, so thank you.